Okay, let's try that again. I was just about to mix the plaster and the stone and the camera stopped. So take it from the top. So we've got our setup and our flange wax up here. We're going to make a matrix out of gypsum so that we can process this into a flipper. The matrix is going to go over the labial and the incisal of the tooth, and it's going to give us the position of the tooth and the shape and size of the flange that you've waxed up, so that we can put cold cure acrylic in there, and we can put this tooth back in the same place and create a flange of the same size and shape as you've made. Before we do anything with anything, be it wax or acrylic or stone or whatever, the first thing we're going to think about is, do we need to separate? Well, this matrix has to come off, so yes, we do need to separate. For separators on stone, I'll often use, this is just a mix of soapy water. So it's a little bit of dish soap in some water, and this works nicely as a plaster separator, but this isn't what we usually use at school. At school, we usually end up using Vaseline, and you'll also find that a lot of labs just use Vaseline. Vaseline works great. It works for a lot of things. It does have its problems because Vaseline can contaminate materials, and if you put on too much Vaseline, then whatever you're going to make can take the shape of the chunks of Vaseline that you've put on there. So I've already separated this once in the first try at this, so I'm just going to put a little more Vaseline on here. You only need a little. I'm going to put it on the labial surfaces of the teeth and the tissue there. I'm going to put it on the lingual and the incisal. Don't want a whole huge amount, just want enough to put a thin layer over the stone. You don't want any chunks of Vaseline. Excuse me. Okay, so got our Vaseline. Now I'm going to make the matrix with a combination of stone and plaster. You could make it with stone, nice and strong, takes forever to set, and that can just be a problem while you're working with it because it can start to slump and run around. Plaster works nicely, sets really fast, but plaster's weak, and if you make it a little bit too thin, the plaster matrix will break, and then you've got a little bit of trouble. So I've got some plaster and some stone here. I've measured up my water, so I've got 35 mils of water there. I've got a little less than a half a cup of plaster and stone here. I'll just mix them up a little bit, and I'm going to add them to the water. So I want this to be a fairly stiff mix. I don't want it to be a really soft and soupy mix, and that's pretty soft and soupy right now, so I kept a little bit of extra plaster, so I can put a little extra plaster in there to thicken it. So you want this to be thick enough that it's going to be able to, not quite a peanut butter consistency. That's just, it's not bad, it's a little too soft. See how it slumps fairly easily. So I could wait a minute for this, or I could add a little more plaster. My plaster is under the leg of the camera tripod here, so I don't even know if I can get at it. Just as the way that I mix the plaster is by, or the gypsum, is by working it against the palm of my hand. Now I've mixed up a whole lot here because I measured it. If I was actually doing this for a case, I wouldn't mix nearly this much material, but we give you a ratio of approximately a half a cup to 35 mils of water, so that's what I made. So, well, I've got a minute, I can talk about this. What you want to do to make your matrix is you want to take just a little bit of this stone and you want to get it in like a little rectangular shape. Now you can do it with your spatula here. I'm cheating because I'm used to using my little straight-sided spatula. But what I want to do is I want to have this little rectangle of stone. That's what I want. And I want to be able to pick it up on my spatula like that and have it keep that rectangle shape. So I'm going to let this stiffen up just a little bit more. Ideally I would have started with this just a little thicker, but I can't get at my plaster. So as you work it, so what I'm doing is I'm making a little square and then scooping it off the my bowl and then putting it back down on the bowl and making my little square again, so that it's not a square, it's a rectangle for you geometry purists there. Okay. Until I've got this little shape of stone like this, which is pretty regular shape. And now I can take this shape and I can apply it to my model. Because I've made it into a rectangle, it's going to go onto my model like a rectangle. And I'm just going to lay it over the tooth. So I'm just laying it over the tooth that I want the matrix of. Because this is stone and it's you know, a pretty strong material. You don't need a huge thickness of this material. You do need the material to come over the incisal edge of the tooth that you're making the matrix of, and at least one other tooth on each side. Sorry, I don't know if I was in the camera there. So I'm just kind of neatening this up a little bit while it's soft. Okay. And the stone is starting to set now. So I can leave it for the moment. Yeah, I'll just leave it. I should leave it. I shouldn't play with it. And then remember to clean out your bowl. So that's going to take, because I've mixed plaster with the stone, that's only going to take a few minutes to set. So I'll give that, it's probably going to need about 15 minutes total to reach sufficient strength for me to take it off. And you'll know that you've reached sufficient strength when it's heated up and then cooled down again. That's when your final set is completed, and then I'll be able to snap the pull this stone matrix off, and your tooth your tooth can come off if you want, or can come off if it has to, but ideally your tooth will stay on the model. It doesn't really make a big difference either way. Okay, so I'll just give that a couple of minutes to finish setting, and then we'll take it off and do the tooth prep, and we'll be ready to make our flipper. So the stone matrix is set now. I'm just going to grab the matrix and give it a little pull, and it pops right off of the model. You can see the imprint of the wax up and the tooth in there. Just going to use a knife to clean up the edges a little bit. You don't want any really thin bits of stone hanging around because they can break off and go into your acrylic when you're putting your acrylic in. So just make sure that the edges of this are nice and neat. I like to make it so that I can see the incisals of the teeth on either side, because you want to be able to see that it's sitting completely onto the model. So I want to be able to see, let's see if I can get this to go back on, there we go. I want to be able to see that it's seated completely on the model when I do my when I add my acrylic. You don't need this much stone back here. That's a bit of a holdover from me normally doing this with a silicone matrix. A stone matrix can be much thinner than a silicone matrix, and by thinning the stone back here, it just makes it a little easier to be able to get into the lingual here. You don't, with a stone matrix, I don't have to have the stone coming over the incisals so much here. I could cut this down. You only need 1 millimeter or so over the incisal, because all it's doing is providing a vertical stop that when you put this on the model, it's going to seat. If I can line it up without looking at it, there we go. Okay, so when you put it on the model, it's going to go down and seat until it sits on those incisals. That's your vertical stop as to where this matrix is going to fit. Okay, so we can now take our tooth off. We can pop the tooth off. We can take off the wax. Just going to pick off most of the wax here and pick the wax off of the tooth. And now I can boil off the tooth and the model, get rid of all of the traces of wax. I'm going to wash the model with a little bit of soapy water and then boil it again. That'll help to get rid of the wax. It'll also help to get rid of any Vaseline that's on there. Then I can, once I've cleaned the tooth, I can prepare it. I'm going to prepare it by just gently trimming over the ridge lap and the lingual of the tooth to give fresh acrylic for our acrylic to bond to. And then with the matrix, after I've cleaned up the matrix the way that I want it, I'm going to boil and wash the matrix also, just to get any Vaseline out of here. And then we'll paint the matrix with separator. We'll soak the model and paint it with separator, and then we can go ahead and process the denture. So I'm just going to do all of that preparation with the boiling off and the cleaning and the separating, and then come back and we'll process the acrylic.